Alright, what is up YouTube? It is K-Rad here. I'm back with another good video or a live stream for tonight. We're going to be talking about some, good MMA. It's going to be a good controversial topic that I wanted to get off my chest to talk about, is MMA taking over boxing? I think this is a question that a lot of people try to think that it makes sense to talk about, but I think for all the MMA fans, they're gonna probably get mad at me for saying, about the wrong difference of opinion. But I'm not really gonna be talking about like opinions. I'm gonna be talking straight up facts. But I'm going to basically state why MMA is not taking over boxing, and I'll probably even, challenge like the argument of if MMA is really taking over boxing, because the issue with MMA is just simply to the fact that MMA is never at the level of boxing's, historical success. And when we look at the MMA worldview, everybody kind of reverts to the UFC, because the UFC was like the very first premier sports fight league network that really, made MMA kick off. MMA has probably been around since, I'd say, like the 1970s or the 1980s at best. Maybe 60s to even, make it a little bit more exact on those, type of, fighting eras. But when it comes to MMA is a sport where people are fighting with 4-ounce gloves, and you're fighting in a cage, and you barely have the ability to have any proper means of skill, where you're just going in there, hitting somebody to death, and you could either win by KO or submission, and if best, probably by decision, or basically like whatever type of winning conditions can be made for the match. The problem with MMA is that the fighters that fight, they do fight at a high level. If we're talking about, MMA in the West, like in America, of fighters fighting on UFC or Pride, Invicta, all these networks that were coming up at the time to revolutionize, to revolutionize the sport. But when you compare that to boxing, boxing is a little bit more different. Boxing has been around for probably thousands of years, ever since the Egyptian era, where pugilistic combat sports was invented for the sake of political enjoyment of people to see two guys get inside the ring and actually fight each other for dominance and respect. But it was mainly for the pugilistic, basically the pugilistic duel of man, of who comes out on top and who shows their heart to win. And the issue with MMA is that MMA is not really at that level that many would say that it is, which it does make good, decent money, but when you really think about it, MMA is absolutely horrible. I'd probably say MMA is probably worse than boxing, because one, you're taking way more punishment inside a octagon versus inside the ring. You can move around more in the boxing ring. In MMA, you have to learn everything quick to be, on that twitch-like reactionary defense, to understand certain moves that your opponents throw at you, and you have to think about your decisions when you throw a punch, because anything happens in a MMA match to be more riskier, and the, severity of what would happen in that match could be very problematic for either fighter inside, the octagon versus inside the boxing ring. The boxing ring is not really that, how should I say, like the boxing ring is not that risky when, like both fighters have gloves on, that have like a little bit more ounces to it. like, like what? I think it's like at least 8-ounce gloves for most boxing matches, but MMA is like 4 ounce. So, the severity of punches are way more deadlier in a mixed martial arts match where fighters are competing at a pretty high level to fight in a brutal competition where you don't know what's expected out of those types of hits that are being thrown at you. So either way, when we do look at MMA has only really been around for at least less than, I'd probably say maybe like 50 to 60 years. It's really been a pretty weak sport because, MMA, doesn't really have too much of a widespread competitive, overdrive compared to boxing. Boxing has a lot more, how should I say, a lot more traditional fans. And the issue with the sport is just simply that the best are not fighting the best. And when people argue about, boxing, being so bad and it's not just giving fans what they ask for, whenever there is a time where, the best are fighting the best, that's when MMA can't compete because MMA tends to be lying on the notion to think that boxing can never be on MMA's level. And the problem is just simply that MMA does not have the competitive drive for business to keep letting these big fights compared to boxing be, in the same realm of competition. Because name me like one time where, a guy like, Evander Holyfield or Mike Tyson would ever have an event outcompeted by their boxing event that would most likely, be taken out by MMA. And the answer is none, because nobody will ever say that, hey, MMA did better on the same night compared to Mike Tyson versus, Evander Holyfield. That's never going to happen. You're not going to see those pay-per-view numbers at that high level. But the issue with, MMA pay-per-views is that those pay-per-views do not add up to any of the numbers, compared to boxing or any other combat sport. Like kickboxing. Well, I mean, kickboxing isn't really at that level with boxing either. But, when I'm trying to explain here is that MMA is such a crappy sport because, the amount of popularity that MMA really gets is not even at the level of boxing. There's too many stories that boxing has with, the greatest fighters of the, decade or the century. They've earned their stripes in the ring. And the problem is that a lot of people don't acknowledge that out of boxers. They just think like, oh, well, these are just fighters that had their time. But MMA is like the new generation of fighting. And that's simply not true. I don't care what anyone says. MMA is by far the most garbage sport out of all. Because one, the pay is horrible. Two, the promotional, I guess like strength out of MMA fights are really not that good. And I guess like the rivalries built out of it really don't make any sense. Because it's like, it's really weak. It's very bland. It doesn't really hold that much weight. Because what, what people really say out of MMA is that MMA is going to do better than boxing, and boxing's going to die out, and nobody in MMA is going to be I guess how should I say? Nobody in MMA is going to be shunned out, but boxing will. Which means is that all the bigger names from boxing are just going to be replaced with all the bigger names in MMA. And I find that hard to believe because boxing has been around for thousands of years, if not since the age of human existence. Because pugilism is a very naturalized you know, concept of human fighting where people do fight to the death, but it's not to the point where people die. That's why boxing is a very good westernized sport. But UFC and all these MMA, functions and these, foundations, they're really not doing anything but just complaining about who's going to fight who and what they want out of their money. And then the drama out of it just doesn't really make any sense. It's pretty weak. And how people fight in MMA, it's absolutely, like a joke. There's really no style when it comes to MMA. People try to say like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is what made MMA, but at the end of the day, it's still boxing, because boxing is what makes a fighter. See, now, for any MMA fans I'm probably going to piss off, I don't really care, because MMA, to me, is just, it's not that type of sport that I had once, I would say, like, respected, because there was some good things that I liked out of MMA, but, ever since, like, the UFC early, I guess, like, golden age began, had ended, with guys like Randy Couture, Rampage Quentin Jackson, Rashad Evans, John Jones, all these guys, they definitely made me look up to them, but they never made me respect them and remember them for a lifelong time. Some of those fighters are not clean, and they didn't really catch like my eye for me to say, wow, you know what, I'm going to just grow up to be like them, or you just go back to like my history book in sports and see them coming on to the new generation of fighting sports. No, so that's what really kind of like throws me off about that the sport of MMA doesn't really have too much of a foundation of what it brings to the table, because people just think like MMA is going to dominate the world, and simply that's just not true, because boxing has way better fights, and the level of competition, if boxing is consistent, is still way better than MMA. See, now with MMA can be at a level to maybe compete with boxing, but still no. If MMA were to theoretically beat out boxing, the only way that happens is that boxing has completely failed, and nobody's making the effort to, demand the best, fighting the best, and having a proper structure in boxing where you're not avoiding your toughest competition, you're actually, giving yourself the opportunity to give yourself the easy way out. That's why the Vasyl Lomachenkos of the world and the Canelo Alvarez's of the world are destroying the sport of boxing. And what I really don't like out of the sport is just simply that the people that, ask for fights that they want don't get made, because the fans are keeping that same stupid energy to allow those type of, bad practices to happen. And what can be fixed about the sport of boxing is just simply stop letting promoters control fighters. Fighters need to be controlling themselves, because, what needs to happen is just simply, like that if fighters were to control their career, which I've kind of been arguing to say that, if they were to have their own type of foundation where, they had, let's just say, maybe like a fight league, or, let's just say they're pretty much like their own free agent. They're covered with, with everything, all the benefits, everything that they ask for to be covered as a fighter. I would definitely respect that out of them. But the issue is just that, the money that's involved with MMA, with boxing and MMA in today's combat sports is simply that there's a lot of, government regulation that destroys the production and the, how should I say, the the innovations that could be made for both sports to inspire more people to get in, to get into the sport more. Because, the issue is that if people are not being incentivized to become a fighter, and there's not enough money being put into, that sport either way, then that's what's destroying the sport. Because a lot of those people are just not as, heavily inspired getting into the sport as well. So that's really the problem, with the sport either way, because not a lot of people are being pushed into the sport more. And what I don't like out of the sport of boxing is that when people do get into boxing, you don't know where your foundation is in the sport of boxing. Because the sport of boxing has this issue where people don't have a proper foundation and their careers are not brought up correctly, where you don't know if this fighter is going to become a good fighter or not. Like Terrence Crawford, I've been saying this for so many damn times for the past couple weeks, but Terrence Crawford is absolutely the biggest, egoistic fighter ever that has had his career ruined by Bob Arum. See now, as much as I love Terrence Crawford and I enjoy his skill set as a fighter, Crawford, he let that happen to himself. Why? Because he stuck with a crappy promoter by the name of Bob Arum that did not give him proper opportunities when opportunities were meant for him to leave and start a brand new chapter somewhere else. See now, there's plenty of options that a fighter can go. And what a fighter can do is that a fighter can be his own boss, and he could either go a different direction and go with a really good promoter that gives him, a proper, like basically a proper path to be built as a good fighter. See, the reason why Errol Spence has a big name in boxing is because he is his own promoter. That's why Errol Spence, he has his own promotional line company, which is, I think, Man Down Promotions. But that's what fighters, or a good number of them over at the PBC, do, so that way they can make more money. But what should be happening is that fighters need to have, their own foundational market where they're covered for, a lifetime, amount of fights that they get into, and they could have all the benefits covering them. And then on top of that, they could either become a free agent and just keep taking all these free agent type of fights, or they could join some sort of like an organization similar to the UFC, or let's just say any of those I guess fight networks, I'll just say UFC, because UFC had fight teams, and you had one leader versus another leader with their fighters and their team, and basically these fights were to help fighters grow that were on the come up. But once you get into the higher upper echelon fighting, rankings, you had to probably be recognized within that one organization for one belt. Or if you're fighting for multiple belts, it should just be one face, one name for the belt. But I guess even with one belt, that's really the biggest corruption ever, to have one champion that's being protected by a certain title commission, and then it's really difficult for that champion to not have a proper foundation, or I guess a proper rules of regulation to regulate the corruption standards that are keeping these corrupt fighters to be in business when they are champion or not champion, just to find an easy way out to get to that title fight. Because with MMA is doing its job. The UFC is having the best fight the best, but The issue with the UFC is that the UFC's marketability is not at the level with boxing where you could get more people to watch UFC versus boxing. There's actual technicality shown in the sport. You have to actually be a true fan of the sport of boxing to actually know what boxing is about. And that's really the biggest, problem with boxing is that when the best don't fight the best and you have bums fighting, like fighting the best, or you have like, like a semi good fighter fighting a really bad fighter or maybe decent fighter. Like everybody's style is different. That's why styles make fights. Same thing with UFC, but it's probably like a little bit more different. It's more like whoever hits each other harder in a fight that has, the better technique and the better IQ of that fight can win. But when we really think about it, it's like anything happens in the, MMA match that could go wrong very quick. But compare that to a boxing match. A boxing match is way more simpler to show you based on the fighter's style of how they fight. It's really determined by who has more hunger and drive to get up to that level of fighting to become a good fighter. Because the issue with boxing is just simply that when the best don't fight the best, a lot of people always criticize how this fighter fights and what this fighter does for the sake of their career. And I don't know, it's just like when I do see like Conor Benn or Josh Kelly, like these British fighters that get hyped up out of Britain that are said to be like really good fighters, but in the end they're like not that good at all. Like those type of fighters need to be fighting on a global level. Like that's what boxing needs in order for that type of competition to be concurrent and consistent, where you're not avoiding tough competition. If you want to get up to number one, you have to start fighting guys that are number one. And that's really what the biggest problem with the sport of boxing is, that not a lot of people are really fighting high level competition. And when we as fans demand big fights from boxing, it's just never to be made because the sport of boxing is so stale, where you don't know what's going to be expected out of a good fight or a bad fight. See, now I would say that boxing really needs to have that governing body in place, because if that were to be the case, that will definitely help the sport grow and it'll make the sport way more popular. And I think that is what's needed to make the sport better. But then again, I think people just need to stop putting their faith into boxing, to think that, the fans will just eventually call for the fights. And that's just not how boxing works. Boxing needs to have a proper fan base structure, and the promoters need to get the hell out of boxing. I can't, basically stress this enough to tell people that boxing would be great if promoters got the hell out of the way that's destroying the sport every single day. See, now people want to say that I'm wrong, and that's fine, but when you look at, like, let's just say Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather, that fight could have happened. But the issue being is just that, Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, they were at two different networks fighting, and Bob Arum, he was down to make the fight, but when Manny Pacquiao was saying that he needs like, let's just say 20 million or something, like I think he was like guaranteed like 60 million or 40 million to fight Floyd. Floyd Mayweather wanted him to take a drug test, and Manny Pacquiao was like, he was making up all this bullshit to say, I'm not going to take a drug test, blah blah blah, to not fight Floyd because I'm afraid of needles. And simply, that was just translation for I can't beat Floyd on a fair equal playing field, and I'm a pussy. so I'm going to avoid him. And by that logic, a lot of people had thought Manny Pacquiao was, I guess, speaking the truth of him not wanting to fight Floyd because he has a history of not liking needles. But it's simply not true. It was simply, Pacquiao's fault for basically stating that Floyd, he does, Floyd wanted to fight him, but Pacquiao did not want to, take that offer of, you know, of how should I say, taking the needles or taking the drug test, right? The Olympic style drug test that Floyd wanted to put in place to make sure that Pacquiao didn't cheat. And I'm pretty sure Pacquiao did cheat because Pacquiao, in certain cases has had a history of cheating where he has, been, I would probably say, on the verge of, being exposed for steroids. But if you just probably see it from the Eric Morales fight, he got his ass destroyed in the first fight. And then in the second fight, I guess, he, dominated Eric Morales. And Eric Morales was complaining to show that, Manny Pacquiao, he didn't have all this power from the first fight. And when Manny Pacquiao defeated him, Eric Morales wanted to get a rematch with Manny. And I believe Manny didn't even want to offer Morales that rematch at all. And, for shit like that, that's what I don't like out of boxing. Granted, that could not be the full story. I could be wrong. But I do believe for a guy like Manny Pacquiao, he should not be, getting away with shit like that. I like Manny Pacquiao. I don't think he's, a fraud of any sort. But I would assume Manny Pacquiao. If Manny Pacquiao did have, the courage and balls to actually, fight his contemporaries on a fair, equal playing field, I think that would make Manny Pacquiao a better individual. But, that's what needs to stop in the sport of boxing. That's how I kind of see it with boxing. Boxing needs to be fixed. And, I think until that is, taken out, that is what will make the sport of boxing better. See, now, the issue that I just really have is just simply that when people don't, understand the economics of boxing compared to MMA, boxing has way more money, and it has the capacity to do, lifelong, record-breaking numbers that fans, of the sport know that are going to do well. But the issue is just simply that the best are not fighting the best. See, now, I would say for MMA, if MMA were to do better than boxing, it would need to do record-breaking numbers higher than boxing, which is never going to happen. And it needs to have, more sponsorships in MMA. I believe the UFC has this weird-ass rule where they don't have sponsorships. But I want to say maybe for Bellator, right? They allow fighters to have sponsorships. Basically, support their fighters. Which I, purely believe that, every fighter should be compensated for the companies that want to do business, with them. But, when it comes to, I would say any type of sponsorship that could be a lifelong, type of thing where every fighter is covered for the success and the hard work that they put into, that sport, yeah, then, support that fighter, I don't see any issue with that. There should be no limitations for any combat sport, for anybody to be restricted. And I think that is what kind of makes, I guess, MMA so bland and stale. As well with boxing, because boxing really has this issue of trying to make money, especially at the lower levels, because once you make it up to the higher level, it's really hard to come back up when you do lose, because a lot of fighters have this issue of not fighting their contemporaries because they make up this horrible excuse of, you know, of basically stating that they don't want to fight their contemporaries, aka they duck them because they make up the horrible notion that if I lose, then I'm going to lose my career and fans are going to doubt me and I'm never going to become, you know, like the best. And that's simply not true. The best have always lost. You know, take a look at, you know, guys like, I don't know, Evander Holyfield, he's lost. Guys like, you know, Tommy Hearns, he's lost. And I would say guys like, I don't know, Mike Tyson, he's lost. So it's not like he's a bad fighter, you know. It's just that some people in the sport have done really good or really bad. But I don't really know. It's not really something I really care about, but I'm just going to make my final point to say that MMA is garbage. You guys are never going to get up to that level. I'm simply, you know, speaking in the defense of boxing. But until boxing comes back on top and destroys MMA once again, I don't want to hear anything from MMA dick writers telling me that MMA is such a good sport, boxing is dying, and it will be dead. It will not be dead until the fans wake up and all the dumbass racist decasts are taken out of the picture and the sport of boxing will be back on track. Alright, that's pretty much what I gotta say. F you to all my haters, and I will see you guys later. Thank you. Bye.